Hi, Matthew Sinclair. I wanted to talk to you today about some new data on what's going on in the cloud market. Some interesting points to consider about what that tells us about competition in this and other big tech markets. First, it's worth noting that cloud covers a lot. There's that core infrastructure offer I think people often think of, so storage, compute, other IT functions, but on the cloud rather than a hard drive in your office. There's also platform as a service. That's deploying your apps with the cloud. And finally, software as a service, using applications which are running on the cloud rather than on a local machine. Now, particularly rather than being installed on a local machine. Now, under these headers, there's a whole lot of diversity and a whole load of options, and often including the DIY option of on-premises servers. And we'll see later how big a deal that is. So new research on the cloud market, this is coming from Public First, which is a consultancy here in the UK, and the CCIA, which is an international association, for the, particularly its membership among the larger tech companies. So they spoke to 1,001 senior business decision makers, which for that kind of sample is very large. So it should give us a decent insight into what's going on in this market. So firstly, how are companies buying cloud? And I think there's a couple of interesting points in the research here. First, they're already doing what we'd call multi-homing. This is where you're using multiple providers. You've already crossed that Rubicon, where you're comfortable using different providers for different services, or scaling providers for a given service up or down as the proposition changes. In those cases where they are only using one provider, I would bear in mind that that could be accompanied by on-premises solutions. So it might be a cloud provider and having a server in the office, for example, or it could just be not using that many cloud services. So you've got one provider because you're kind of using it to do one thing, like say deploy a certain app. So indeed, when we look at a common use case of storing and sharing files, on-premises servers remain one of the most common solutions. About half of companies surveyed. So I think that you've got both competition within cloud, but also competition for cloud to establish the value proposition that it is providing compared to what will often be a kind of status quo of on-premises still for a lot of businesses. So why do companies buy cloud if on-premise is still an option? And it's pretty simple from looking at this. It's more reliable, more flexible, and easy to use. So it's improving the business's ability to deliver reliably. I think times they kind of forget just how unreliable, particularly the web services were in the early days. When they would just get floods of traffic and go down all the time in a way that obviously still happens, but I think it happens a lot less. We've kind of got used to that. And the same is true for other kinds of services. Also, more security. I think that's why we want to be I think why it's sensible that countries, including the UK, have had cloud strategies over time. One rationale, I think, for that is that cloud services can justify greater investments in security because they are spreading those over a broader range, broader use than any one customer is generally likely to. And then more flexible and more easy to use. It's just improving the ability of people to get their work done, whether that's deploying apps in a more agile way, or whether it's just being able to access their data from a wider range of places and devices. And that's what dominates these early interests. It's why you buy cloud. That's its use case. But it's not necessarily how they choose between providers. And I think that's interesting. So when you get the impression that for many customers, I think that there's a range of different providers who can meet the bar we discussed on the last slide of providing that security and flexibility. And so then they're competing on kind of normal, healthy reasons. Unless you've got, I know there are instances out there where some cloud providers are better at meeting the needs of customers who have, say, specific security requirements, like being able to show they've taken certain right steps to meet a sort of regulatory bar, for example. And you can see that in this polling, right? Some of that is you can see now, but largely this looks like a story where all the kind of normal criteria you'd hope for are driving the customer decision. You know, those early entries like add up to the quality adjusted price. And that's reflected in a pretty confident position regarding switching. You know, there aren't many looking at the potential to switch, with a real feeling of trepidation. Those who aren't expecting to switch, it's generally because they're kind of happy with their current provider. Now, of course, that doesn't mean there isn't an opportunity in helping the 10% who say they find it hard, or expect, or sort of similar, who think they find it expensive. But that's what you'd imagine market solutions will be. That'll both include competitors finding a way to make it easier or cheaper, but also third parties, consultants, say, helping companies to navigate that process. Right? It is not that this is sort of generally and fundamentally hard. It may be hard for specific kinds of transitions of switching, or for particular, customers with particular sort of difficulties in their own capabilities. And finally, I thought it was worth touching on discounts. Now, sometimes these worry regulators in a wide range of markets, but they can clearly grease the wheels for switching in a positive way. And in this case, the customer experience seems to be that about half have received some kind of discount in return for committing to a certain spend. And for those who do, it's pretty important. Again, that feels healthy. It's not something everyone is feeling compelled to chase, but it's a valuable option for those who use it. So, stepping back, why does this matter? First, just a reminder that, like in lots of other markets, I think cars would be another example, you have big players who can take on the challenge of these kind of complicated, providing these complicated services, but those players can be fighting tooth and nail for customers. And secondly, users can think strategically too, particularly larger players like enterprise cloud customers. They can work to keep their options open when they need to when it's valuable to do so. And finally, I think it's another reminder to think broadly about sources of competitive discipline in digital markets. There's a lot going on in the cloud market beyond the big picture infrastructure market shares. There's lots of different services, different providers, different alternatives. And I think that's true all over the kind of modern tech landscape. I hope you found that interesting. Any thoughts, please drop them in the comments. Please do like, share, subscribe, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.